Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the joint meeting of the Anchorage Assembly and Anchorage School Board of March 7th. And Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Ms. Gray Jackson,
Here.
Mr. Trainee,
Here.
Mr. Croft,
Here.
Ms. Demboski, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Dunbar has asked to be excused. Mr. Evans has asked to be excused. Mr. Flynn has asked to be excused. Pete Peterson,
Present.
Bill Starr, Tim Steele,
Here.
John Weddleton.
Here.
Madam Clerk, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Ms. Fleek, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Sorry about that.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I forgot to have the roll call for the school board members, so whoever's going to do that.
Ms. Ginsburg? Present. Ms. Davis? Ms. Finnegan? Ms. Barset? Mr. President, Ardea? Ms. Bucket? Here. Ms. Snelling? Here.
Thank you very much. There's no addendum to the agenda. Agenda item number 6A, fiscal year 2017 to 2018 budget. Who has the floor?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President and Madam Chair. We have two items that are before you for us to evaluate and learn, I suppose. There'll be the memo will come before you in the total budget this evening. One is a memo looking. The other is a handbook. And Andy Ratcliffe and I are going to walk you through the handbook initially. It gives you the bigger idea of the actions taking place, the deliberate actions in the budget, and then the actual taxes and the money are all dealt with through the memo. So you can take a look at the handbook. This was designed to be a more to be able to communicate to our stakeholders in a broader sense in regard to the school district's investments in learning. The first page really has data about who we are. Of course, many of those things we have in common in regard to our people and the languages and how many square miles we encompass, things like that. ASD goals, you've seen these before. Those are the 6 primary Destination 2020 goals. And this budget is built around achieving those goals. So very deliberate action in the additions that were placed in the budget as well as the reductions to enable us to meet those goals. Destination 2020 did have some investments, which is page 2, to demonstrate that while you may have heard on the news, there's a reduction in FTE, that there was and continues to be investment in work for students and making schools a better place to be. The foundation formula and understanding the local taxes, I'm going to touch base at the top of page 3 in regard to the foundation formula. Many items have come up about perhaps consolidating a school or consolidating multiple schools to save money. And at this point in time, in regard to the manner in which the funding formula operates, we researched 4 different schools and none of them provided a savings in revenue. And I wanted to share that the first item in the state foundation funding formula, which is the school size or school size adjustment, makes it determine our state values small school sites. And so at this point in time, schools that have at least 250 in elementary, and really even middle schools with that amount, or at least 175, the revenue continues to generate revenue at the state level rather than reducing it. So for that reason, the 4 sites that were looked at in the capacity study, none of them, we would continue to serve the students but not receive revenue for serving the same amount of students. The district cost factor has come up many times, and it's been a discussion with our board president and other board members who visited Juneau. in the state to take another look at the schools. The baseline for the cost factor, Anchorage continues to remain 1, and it's based off of old data in regard to, it was really market basket items, sale, cost of homes, gas, groceries, and there is new information. The latest was in 2009 or 11 in regard to that there was a switch of the least expensive place to live in the state, and it's about 45 miles north. And so in reviewing that, has been a discussion with our delegation in Juneau to assist with perhaps even looking at that. There is some caution in that if you were to open up the BSA, we would need new data to do that, to determine that. The other factors, we start with a membership, which is the average daily membership, and it goes through this adjustment formula to where you get what's called the AADM, or the adjusted average daily membership. Schools receive multipliers in the number of students that they have for bilingual, special education, gifted, talented, and career. So the state does recognize that specialized programs to support students does require additional funds. There was another 1.5% increase put in a few years ago to funnel money to school districts through career technical ed factor. Senator out of Eagle River did that. Stoltz. Provided for that. And then correspondence, of course. Any student in correspondence is 9 students for every 10. So every 10 students in correspondence, you can only count 9 of them in this formula. And then, of course, intensive needs factors, which have a 6-point review process and audit on every child that is intensive, receives a 13 times the adjustment. So initially, when we go in and we say at the beginning of the book you saw about 48,000 students, by the time it moves through this factor in the funding formula called the base student allocation formula, we have an adjusted number, which is that first where it says district adjusted ADM. In the books, our adjusted ADM comes out to be that we serve equaling 74,374 students. So it basically, that formula just multiplies students. And this is just to kind of give a little mini review about how revenue is generated at the state level, as well as then local taxes, which Andy will finish the rest of this page.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Bishop. So as we walk through the foundation formula, you get to the adjusted ADM. The state multiplies that by the BSA, the 5,930, to get a basic need. That's not the amount we get. They reduce it for a couple of items. The biggest one being the required local effort that municipalities must put forward for property taxes, or in our case, property taxes. And that's calculated on 2.65 mils of the property value. So when we go through the ordinance and the memo, you'll see a requested increase in taxes from the district, primarily because of the shifting the cost from the state to the municipality. This is based on 2015 to 2016 full value determination for Anchorage, so there's a 2-year lag between what we get on our actual for the deduction versus the current year. So our fiscal year 17 is based on the 2015 fair value, and then our 2018 is based on 2016. So in that time frame, it went up by about 4%.
I'm sorry, I don't
Okay.
mean to interrupt.
I have a question for you. So the city then is going to appropriate 107 million. Does that make us fully loaded?
That's the
That's
required
the amount
local.
we can
That's
totally give you, is that correct?
No,
That's
sir.
the minimum amount.
That's
What's the maximum?
The 209.
so at the bottom it calculates also the additional allowable, which is another 101 million. So the total the city can put in is 209.5 million or so.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's just kind of important as you're seeing the tax rate increase go up, but no change in the way the BSA is calculated or the number of students. We just think it's important for you guys to know why it's going up, and it's based on the property values going up from 2015 to 16 by about 4% based on the full value determination.
The next page really just demonstrates the funding, and the general fund in the budget is $560 million. And the general fund budgeted by function, you can see the state chart of accounts and the functions there. Instruction has the lion's share of the funding. The state does have a statute in regard to 70% of districts must meet, 70% of their budgets or their revenue must go into instruction. And there's over 23 school districts at this time who have to get a special waiver because they cannot meet that 70% of funds going in. Anchorage at this time has 79% of all funds received goes into specifically instruction, which is classroom. It's not administration, it's not maintenance, it is strictly into classrooms. The change from year to year is demonstrated on the bottom in pictures, so that the reductions still demonstrate that the majority of our funds, almost 90% or 89% moving into FY18, goes into people. We are a human resource driven organization. Of the reductions, much less the reductions that we're looking at do affect people then, because when 90% goes into people, it's very difficult to find. So the next page is just demonstrating that the revenue that is received is expended in those categories as well. So that's very transparent. The next items were just specific to the budget development. We had to take some assumptions in regard to the state legislature. In that, we use the governor's budget formula to base these assumptions off of. As we all know, with as recent as House Bill 57, those assumptions have changed. For instance, a benefit to us is that transportation has been increased. We spend about $2.8 million of operations for classrooms to cover transportation costs. So we move that fund. There are three major funds at the state level: nutrition, transportation, and then operations. So we have to adjust those using operation funds. We share that in FY12 to FY18, the revenue per student has changed slightly, but I just wanted to provide all of the information. The state revenue, and then we just divided that by the number of students. Wanted to share as well, the actual meat of the budget is based off of a scalable system for which we had to redesign this year to make it very transparent about where are our resources going in elementary schools, middle, and high. Prior to this time, we were not able to really demonstrate equitable distribution, not equal distribution. The scaling is based off of equal, but then due to school needs and data, we have made additions to different areas. So the budget development included the personnel, some personnel reductions, and that's on the grade level groupings that are found at the bottom of the page. I did want to share that in addition to the Destination 2020 goals, we did do, in our budget meetings, we did a survey of budget feedback, and listed in the overall ranking were valued the top three things in orange: clean and safe school facilities, class size, and effective and rigorous course offerings. And of course, all of those people are involved in ensuring those items. The safety was not only in the safety of the physical plant, but safety and safety cultures, such as investing in school cultures and bullying, and addressing those types of school-wide behaviors as well. Class size was that they didn't really want to see them grow. It was important to keep them stable, and effective and rigorous course offerings. Due to the reductions, they did not want course offerings to diminish. So we're looking at alternative ways to schedule to ensure that students in the end are still offered a good array of coursework. The PTR changes at the bottom actually look better from year to year. 2017, if you just take 9th through 12th graders, it looked as though it was 30.5 at the high school level. When we restructured the budget to be standardized and scalable, this year we're moving into actually decreasing that to a 29-to-1 ratio, which is more beneficial. We also provide additional funding to schools through FTE to cover prep times, or the negotiated agreement preparatory times for teachers in their classes. So while they look better, there are reductions, and that's due to putting all staffing in full view and being transparent, to literally say these are all the resources we have. Just an overview of the last 5 years. The bars are demonstrated below the line of zero because we have made reductions over the last 5 years into personnel. So moving into this year, and the lion's share has been to school support as well as administration, and those are outside of teachers. What we have done this year is to put some funding back into the support for teachers to be able to do their jobs through grant funding. You won't see it in the operations, but we'd like to talk about it because we coordinated and made a deliberate effort to put the functions for grants back into the classroom. So the school reductions, you can see in regard to elementary schools, the changes are 39 for FTE. We do have set aside over 20 teachers at the elementary level to reassign back to the elementary schools when we find out where the students go. We want to have those teachers available that if we have any movement in population, if a school is found under enrollment or over enrollment, that we have teachers ready to be reassigned to the schools. So the net reduction is going to be less than that, but presently schools, not all schools are facing a reduction in staffing. What we did at the elementary schools was just correct the rounding. Previously, if you had 20.1 teachers assigned to a school, we boosted it up to be 21. And frankly, in an elementary school, if I'm over 5 students and they're in separate grade levels, I can probably place them in classrooms without having any one classroom overloaded. However, at an elementary school, if I had 5 students all in 3rd grade and it was in one class, then of course we would have to add staffing. So what we did was, again, just operate with transparency and hold those positions back to be able to replace them in where the need is. Middle schools are very similar. We went to ratios about how are our schools supported through counselors and principals. We found inequities that some of our schools with the highest needs and student populations had the least amount of resources. So we're changing that and putting additions where the need is with student data, whether it is at the higher end in regard to advanced courses or in the reteaching end to catch kids up. So this is strictly based off of student data. High schools, again, and alternative schools, just demonstrating the reductions as well as the investments made. And then finally on page 12, there's district level changes in regard to 3 secretaries, 3 executives at my level are reduced at the district office. Other different support positions, some of them which we couldn't fill, which had been remained open. So we're using some other resources to do that. And then just the information about joining the conversation. We did have the budget process, and we continue to leave the budget survey and taking feedback from our community in regard to how we want schools and how do we want our schools to function in the 21st century moving forward, given the delta of $15 million. So while the governor's budget remained flat, the increased costs, similar to the city is seeing, in insurance and natural movement on the scale, was an increase of $12 million, coupled with the transportation shortage. So we essentially created a budget that was balanced to move to the assembly that included a reduction of approximately $15 million in services and people to meet that gap. It isn't the best, of course, additional resources at the state level we look for. Most recently, we testified along with the city in regard to the transfer of bond debt to local government agencies. So we do have a memo for which the Assembly will review tonight. We can review that quickly or stop for questions at this time.
Mr. Middleton?
On page 8.
8?
8, at the very bottom, under investment. I guess I need to do that question, but the middle one, 48 full-time equivalents for instructional coaches, funded by Title I and Title IIA. So is that like a different pool of money that's outside of what we looked at?
Yes, sir. That would be the grant funding, and those are entitlement grants that flow through the federal government, through the state to Anchorage. And knowing that we had to make some reductions, what we did is look at research and education. What makes a difference? And instructional coaching actually has a larger effect size in changing learning behavior, assisting the people in the classrooms to do the job, than actual class size reductions. So what we did is use the money for those grants. Those grants cannot, because they're for professional development, they cannot be used for classroom teachers. So presently, they're used for lots of different items across the board, a spattering of just improvements here and there, but not collectively with clarity to move forward. So what we've done is taking the different areas of the different grants associated with the federal government, pulled them into one, and said we're moving forward with support to classrooms with all of this function. And so that's why it's in parentheses, because it won't show up in the operation budget, but is an investment back to where we had to reduce.
Okay. So then, not to knock the importance of secretaries, but if you look at secretaries that are cutting the security, we got an email on that, but it does seem kind of counterintuitive, and you would know better, so.
Yeah. So the Council of Great City Schools did a review, and in the KPIs, in regard to what is a high-functioning, school district, we were actually above in the area of assistant principals and above in the area of security guards. And the security guard function was used really very differently in all the schools. So what we did is we do have a security professional, that's a professional security person, going to work with a core group according to the KPIs nationally. We reduced it to that KPI and then invested in the other type of safety and security desired by the community, which was in that safety culture, whether it is for physical safety as well as that affective safety of social emotional. So the idea that security guards are at every door, just watching, they were really used for many different functions. And so we're clarifying the job, providing professional development to those that we have, based that ratio off of national standards, and we actually still we are still above national standards, even changing the ratio. So I feel as though our safety culture is going to be improved with the types of things that our community has been sharing with us. One is physical safety and one is that affective, where we're working on both of them at this time. So we reinvested that money into programs that address the safety culture of all people in the school.
Okay, so
Did you want to say something?
I just want, could you explain why we took the secretary, why we paid for that? What the cost savings actually is by having the secretaries?
Oh, and the secretaries at the middle level were generally switched to the elementary level, because elementary level secretaries, we only had 1.5 per school, and that was a safety concern, because when you have one person who then needs to leave or one person that works half a day, so there was investments made at the elementary level for secretaries, which was a shift from a different secondary level that actually had additional secretaries that were taken out of the budget and then weren't considered in the budget and added at the end, weren't actually identified. So we transitioned those to the elementary level for safety reasons, and then invested in the high school in a program, basically anti-bullying, a program for high-performing schools. We understand, using our data, that certain student groups do feel accepted in our schools and certain don't. And some student groups have success and some don't. So we really know that when there's a high percentage of students not performing, we really then generally have to look at ourselves rather than those students, and then adjust the cultures of those schools to engage students in a different manner.
So how's the secretary per se?
Actually works at the front office. The first site into a school is a secretary for elementary schools, yes.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr. Middleton?
No,
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Steele?
My question was just with regards to the coaches, the educational coaches. Are they, is that done during class time, or is that done after school, or when is it done?
The elementary coaching positions are coaches for the instructors, and it's done right during the school day. So when we see and use data to see that students aren't progressing in some classrooms as well as others, we work to coach that person into better teaching. So it might be modeling teaching, it might be code teaching. Basically, they would be very read in data analysis and as well as programs. The board invested over $2 million in a new curriculum for reading, which we haven't had for 12 years. We know that literacy is struggling. We really don't have an alignment and clarity in our expectations for literacy. And what we have now isn't based on best practices. So the board is using savings account money, their fund balance. They had already appropriated that prior to Christmas so that we can begin the review of curriculum. Curriculum and instruction won't be any good if it's not taken off the shelf and done with efficacy. So the literacy coaches are coupled to ensure that the high quality instruction occurs in every classroom because we have different skills in our teachers, and the goal is to build the capacity in all teachers to meet the needs of kids.
All right, so it's for the teachers as opposed to struggling students.
Yes, sir.
And that's the same program that I know rural school districts have had coaches go out to work with the staff. It's that type.
Very similar, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Any other questions? Thank you, Dr. Bishop. The next agenda item is School District 6-Year Capital Improvement Plan. Who has this one on this agenda? Thank you. Hello.
Good morning, to the President, to the Chair. My name is Tom Roth. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the Anchorage School District. Thanks for the opportunity to provide you a brief overview of the district's 6-year capital improvement plan. My purpose this morning is to inform, for your information, the board did approve the current 6-year CIP at the 21st of February board meeting. This is a requirement from a municipal code of ordinance, and the assembly will receive this document in a assembly information memorandum this month. It may be on the agenda this evening. Next slide, please. So at any time, please stop me to make comments or ask questions. I'd like to very briefly talk about the infrastructure of the Anchorage School District. It goes without saying that the district manages the largest physical plant within the state of Alaska. But it's aging infrastructure. We have 21 schools that are over 50 years old, 50 of which are over 30 years old. 93 facilities. Of that number, 86 are schools, and then we have 7 support facilities. About 2 billion square feet. About 7.7 million square feet. $2 billion of assessed replacement value. We do have 3 undeveloped sites, 2 in the city, 1 up in Eagle River for future school locations. And then just to highlight, we estimate that we have about $425 million in deferred requirements for our infrastructure. Of that amount, about 125,000 are requirements that we consider to be timely, significant, what we categorize as level I1. I'll pause. Any questions or comments on?
Doesn't look like, oh, Mr. Steele.
Yeah, what are the 2 sites within the city? I know 3, I thought.
One I believe is Woodland Park, it's down by Sand Lake.
Okay.
And the other is up in Molden.
Right, that movie theater.
Is that the one down in the flatlands, south of town? Laurel
Southwest
Acres kind of
town,
area?
I believe so.
Or is it the one in West Park?
West Park. I'm sorry.
Okay.
West
And I think there's 2 sites there. There's an elementary and a middle school, isn't there?
There is an elementary and a middle school site. We're currently working through the Office of Economic and Community Development to parcel out the 2 tracks. One of those tracks we're going to sign over to the Muni, I think, for urban development, but we're going to retain the larger tract for the middle school.
There's still a sign on a site that you had down off Arctic Diamond kind of area, Laurel Acres. There is still a sign on that site, but I think you've given that site up to the city.
Okay, I'm not cognizant, but we'll look into it.
Thank you, Mr. Stino. I don't think there are any other questions, please continue. Thank you.
So, just to provide, again, information, and to provide some background into what the administration applied as our guidance when we developed the CIP. First and foremost, our guidance comes from the Anchorage School Board, and this guidance that you see here, I'll give you a moment to read it. This was guidance that we received last year, it was validated this year, but in short, the guidance from the school board is to focus on what we have, take care of those critical components for building functionality, for life safety, and to defer, when feasible, full school renewals and renovations. Some of the other factors that contribute, that did contribute to this year. The outcome of the 2016 bond, we did not get voter approval of that last May, so those requirements are represented in the current 6-year plan. The district is closing Mount Iliamna. For those who are aware, we're expanding the SPBS programs in 4 schools. So Mount Iliamna was on the 6-year plan, that has since come off. This is a collaborative effort between the administration, also the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, which is a formal advisory committee that reports to the superintendent and provides input into recommended capital planning over time. And then lastly, the environment matters. In the recent decisions on debt reimbursement policy have had some bearing on some of the outcomes. And I'll also just note that we do collaborate with the municipality and the University of Anchorage planners on this long-range plan. So, thank you, Mike. What I'd like to first do is orient you to the plan. This is the 6-year capital improvement plan that was approved by the school board. First, in the upper right corner, you'll note there is a legend. There are 4 different project types. The first is what we call component replacement or renewal, where we're replacing individual components, whether it's roofs, boilers, heating, ventilation systems. So individual projects. And then you go into more collective projects. You have the emerging component renewal, which is an effort to replace those key systems in a school, and then a more involved a building life extension, which is an increase in the number of systems that are addressed. And then lastly, we get into building renewals and the different levels of schools. So to orient you to the chart, if you work from left to right, in the far left, you'll see the schools that are potentially affected by proposed projects. The project type in the second column, and then you'll see years 1 through 6. Year 1 represents this current fiscal year, 2017. As the assembly and the board members know, the amount that we are presenting to the public in April, based on board approval and the assembly's approval, is an amount of $58,450,000, and this is addressing specific component renewals. It's all component renewals. Roofs for 7 schools in our student nutrition building, 3 heating and ventilation system replacements, and then a renovation to the library, joint use library of West High School and Forley Middle School. So that's this year, and then in the sequencing years 2018 out to 2022. I'll just note year 4 or 2020, that marks what we believe is the projected end of the state's debt moratorium or moratorium on debt reimbursement. And you'll note in the subsequent years that you'll see a significant increase in the number that we are projecting that we could be bonding for. Now, what I'd like to do is just kind of call your attention to the upper portion of the chart. There are 3 rows I just want to highlight very briefly. The first is the targeted capital investment. And I'll come back to the amount of deferred maintenance that we have in the district, about $425,000. So this projected.
Million.
I'm sorry.
425
Million.
$425 million, I'm sorry.
It's 425,000, we can do that in 1 year.
So $425 million is our deferred requirements. So that, what we're depicting on that upper row, the targeted capital investment, this is what we think we need to invest in our capital to reduce that amount. The next row, the projected bond amount, this is a fungible amount. In my experience the last couple of years, this is really based on what we believe the environment can support, will support in terms of investment in the district's capital. As I mentioned, the recent moratorium on debt, as well as the governor's decision last June to reduce debt reimbursement that has an impact.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Croft?
Well, I just wanted to be on the list when he was done.
Okay, please continue. Thank you.
And then lastly, just in that third row, that highlights what we project to be debt retirement for each of those years. So it's not my intent to review each of the columns of each year of each project, but I'm certainly prepared to discuss by exception. I will just highlight that the district uses an empirical system based on the facility condition assessment program. So the schools that are on the list for the 6-year improvement, or on the 6-year improvement plan, have a relatively higher or comparatively higher facility condition index number, which prioritizes them on the capital improvements. So I'll pause at this time if there are any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Croft?
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Tom. On school closures, which I know to be a difficult issue, I looked at the October agenda of the school board considering school closures and essentially rejecting that idea. There's, from that capacity study, that had slightly different numbers from the one, but the capacity study that the school board reviewed in October had our middle schools at about 80% capacity, our elementary and high schools at about 90. And you're never gonna get that exactly right, but that there was excess capacity in the middle schools, of 80%, and in particular, Central was at about 66%. Chugiak High School, but it was about 69%. Those are the standouts in terms of under capacity. And this plan has both Central at 21 million and Greening, which is affected by the capacity of Eagle River, whether you rebuild there, at 11 million, or a total of $32.6 million that we're gonna incur to rebuild capacity in our middle schools when we're already over capacity and projected to be in there. And then there's Mears and Romig are also on this schedule for another 73.5 million, a total of over 100 million of rebuilding middle schools where we're at 80% capacity. And nobody has a crystal ball, but we're not projecting massive economic growth that would fuel increases in our student body. Why does that make sense? To spend, I guess particularly the 32 million on Central and Greening when we're already over capacity.
And I'll open this to the board. I would argue, and you are correct, with regards to the numbers you're talking about, and Assembly Member Croft is talking about the enrollment numbers against the programmatic capacity of schools. Probably one of the areas that we looked at was the enrollment of both Mears and Central Middle School, which if you look at those schools in terms of the geographic separation, they're less than 2 miles apart. They did have low numbers, but the issue is what we were getting in terms of feedback from the long-range planners here in the municipality and our impression or understanding of the mayor's aspirations for what the second business district is that this is an area of projected expansion in the future. So if you don't invest in it now, you're gonna invest in it eventually because of the anticipated projected expansion in this area. So that's a quick nutshell from my perspective, and I would imagine there are probably opinions throughout the room about the importance of these schools to that long-range master plan of the city.
Just a quick follow-up, the point that Dr. Paramo made.
Bishop.
Yeah, sorry, you gotta update that. It is well taken. I mean, this study said that closing a generic middle school, it didn't pick one out, but the middle school B would have substantial savings and then substantial lost revenue from the formula by consolidating and that the net of that was about 200,000 on this sort of generic closure. And I understand how difficult that is to lose 200,000 in net revenue. It's also difficult to put 30 million up before the voters where that capacity is not strictly needed. So I do get the trade-offs. I just am searching for, we approve your capital plan. As I've said to you and other board members, other school board members many times, I think the school district has one of, or maybe the best capital program in government. That is, it does it on the merits, on numbers, on two different indices. It updates it, it has a plan, and it yearly submits it to voters. All those characteristics are better than the state or federal system or any other system I've been familiar with. So I do think you do a great job on your facility. And I know, personally and professionally, how difficult school closure discussions are. But I think that trade-off of 200,000 in revenue versus 30-odd million in debt is gonna be a difficult one to justify.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Trainee?
Just build on what Eric said. I have no faith all the states ever going to bring back the bond assistance they had so generously given to us for years. Nothing I've seen now indicates they're going to change their direction. I think if anything, they're going to keep reducing what they give the school district in Anchorage. So I really appreciate you guys working on the maintenance we need to do, because at 425 million you're talking about, the budget we've been not doing on maintenance, we've got to step up that maintenance. Because I've got no faith at all that the state's going to start opening up the spigot on money coming in here. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Dr. Bishop?
Yes, and I would have to be updated on the data. The data for which the board reviewed for closures this year based off of capacity, there wasn't one that was within $900,000, nearly $1 million of savings or expenditure. It was a lot wider than $200,000. I mean, that is a drop in a bucket compared to what we were looking at with the continuation of having to educate kids. So we literally did it on the amount of revenue per kid at each school. So it was really deliberate. We did make boundary changes on J-Bear this year that passed the board to even out schools and provide better use. One school was at 127% capacity, another one was about 60. So we made some boundary changes. Mount Iliamna was not a school site up in itself, so it never generated its own site formula. So we actually are Mount Iliamna moving with the investments that we're putting to support students. We have a net increase or avoidance of $600,000. So that one made sense. And we also moved Crossroads. Of the ones where we saw added value, Crossroads is being moved to KCC. And at this point in time, we're saving additional funds on counselors as well as the rental of, about $85,000 per year. So of the financial indicators for which we studied this year on the data, we actually did take action on the ones that were appropriate. The opening of Alaska Middle College actually is going to generate an additional $1 million than we had this year to serve the same amount of students.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Mr. Steele?
Yeah, with The Romig and West Campus is a fantastic place, but I'm concerned about the overpopulation of Romig. Are there plans to do some additions to the Romig building or campus to account for the demand and the population? Or what's going to happen when there's boundary changes there?
Yeah, I would, through the chair, I wouldn't recommend adding additions to a campus that is actually overcrowded. You would look at boundaries, or really the way that you attract students and your customers is building programs for which students want to get educated. And so we have over 3,000 students from Anchorage choosing statewide correspondence school. So I would rather go after the customers who feel like they're being disserved in our community, and find programs and build programs out of some schools that are innovative and forward-thinking. Places like Central are primed to be able to adjust and move on a dime and be innovative to attract additional students, which then goes to that ADM. And that's why I spent time understanding it, because students matter in our bottom line. And attracting them back just by opening the middle college, we're not only going to serve our students, but we're bringing nearly 40 students back into our district who left to have an opportunity such as that. And 40 students is hundreds of thousands of dollars to us, so that we can serve others and hopefully bring them in through the correspondence back to Anchorage to be provided the type of education they want. So I would not suggest an addition onto a building that's already capacity. It would be things like changing boundaries, building out a school that it is attractive, has the kind of program that students need and parents want for the 21st century.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Anything
Definitely a
else, Mr.
school of
Steele?
choice for a lot of people in the neighborhood, so you still would have demand of people wanting to go there. When you change boundaries, that's going to be difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Ms. Plunkett.
I just wanted to comment on what Dr. Bishop had mentioned, that also we're looking in terms of school sites. KCC is not listed as a school site right now, which was a huge what to the board, that it wasn't considered a school site, which I think is the only reason, Eric, as you remember, that school was one that could be closed for a positive impact, which would not have made sense to students, ever to have made sense to students. So it's looking at that. That will also help our revenue picture once we get it established and set up, but that won't be this year.
FY18.
Yeah.
Or 19.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Plunkett. Mr. Gossett-Gissner.
And one more thing I want to add, we're working with ANCEP to begin an ANCEP high school. So that will also add more options and serve kids, and potentially even bring students in from rural districts into our district to partake in that opportunity. There's also some discussion, this is all preliminary, so don't take this to the bank yet, but whereas KCC, there's a limit in terms of what can be built on that site. If we did a second middle college utilizing the facilities of the neighboring UAA campus, and we're able to co-seat UAA kids in KCC classes for opportunities that are not available to them currently on the UAA campus, we then have expanded opportunities for our kids without having to build anything. So there's all types of innovative ideas trying to bring enrollment in, and at the same time serve our student body and their interests in a better, more efficient way.
Thank you, Mr. Gossett-Gissner. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, is KCC at capacity?
No.
Or how much capacity does it have left remaining?
Well, we are moving the Crossroads program into there, so
Okay.
that's small though, but if we were to co-seat UAA kids in there and be able to have our students taking middle college classes on the UAA campus, that would definitely increase enrollment.
There's
That'd be
physical
good.
space.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Any other, Mr. Weddleton?
I just, so the gap between your targeted capital investment and your bond amounts, you're gonna get from where?
I'm sorry?
You have a gap between your targeted capital investment.
Well, the target
And
is.
then the bond.
The target is aspirational. We're not probably, I don't anticipate that we would go after that, though.
Thank you, Mr. Barroso. Mr. Gossett, yes.
As a segue to that, if we look at the behavior of the board this year, we did dig into our savings to handle, Mr. Seela talked about the Roman roof, end of last year into this year. And when the need arises, that's why we have a savings account, it's for those emergencies. As you know, there are some items we took off the bond this year in order to put forth a bond that was less than our anticipated debt reimbursement. And that's something that the board has to consider. In fact, I just brought that up again in the finance committee meeting yesterday. We still have some very real needs that have to be addressed. And can we take that from our savings, or are we going to have to redirect our savings to more budget cuts from the state government? So that's-
Thank you, Mr. Gossett. Is there any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Rolla. The next agenda item is shared services, and I asked that that agenda topic be put on the agenda because we said that we were gonna continue to have the discussion at our quarterly meetings. So who would like to start the discussion? Ms. Ross, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Oda Browse. I'm Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Berkowitz, and along with Tom Roth and all of the other people involved in these departments, we've been working on shared services agreements. We wanted to give you a quick update on the topics of discussion from the last meeting, and then we're going to throw to Mark Spafford and Darren Hargraves from Solid Waste Services and ASD Maintenance. As of right now, the MOUs for the fleet shared services and the workers' comp adjusting shared services are complete. There is a job posting out on the street for the workers' comp coordinator position that will be the shared services alignment office in the workers' comp arms of both ASD and MOA. So that's moving forward. That's what we said we would do and we did it. The single largest cost saver that was identified in the conversations that we've had was the healthcare component. And ASD has gone out for an RFP for clinic services. They awarded to Vera Health. And we checked in with our procurement office, and our procurement office verified that because ASD had gone through their procurement process, that MOA did not need to go through a similar procurement process, that we could piggyback on the ASD contract. So we are currently reviewing the scope of services that has been agreed to with ASD to see if it fits what MOA needs to do. And we're in initial discussions with Vera to provide services to MOA and ASD employees covered by health plans in what would theoretically be 2 clinics in town for convenience purposes. And Suzanne Fleet Green is our lead, along with Juna Penny from MOA. So if there's anything else that needs to be thrown in there, she can pipe up. Okay. So that's what we're doing. We're ideally, next joint meeting, we will have more information on where the healthcare services component is and what the additional departments that we would explored are.
Thank you. Mr. Gossett, yes?
Yeah, I just want to add on to make sure people understand the advantages of the MOA having a similar clinic setup is all ASD and MOA employees who choose to be in this clinic can use both clinics, not just the one specific to their organization, as well as the company's clinics in the state of Washington and in the state of Arizona and in any place else that they expand. So it gives much more opportunities for healthcare services in various locations.
Thank you, Mr. Gossett. You say, Mr. Croft?
Ms. Brous, what if any are the potential for snowplow cooperation or shared services?
We've discussed that with maintenance, and at this time, none, because we need the same services at the same time. And so without growing the heavy equipment fleet and the personnel staffing, it wouldn't have any cost savings.
They have to open their schools and we have to open our buildings? But then there's a lot that happens after we get them open, right? Then, once the schools are open, isn't there some free time for snowplows owned by the school district?
Yes, absolutely.
If if I might, just very, very briefly to tag on to what Ralph was talking about. As addressed, we have immediate needs of the municipality and the district, and there is that capacity once those immediate needs are addressed to pool resources. But I think the other thing that we are looking at, we had conversations, initial discussions about moving towards a common heavy equipment fleet between the municipality and the district. So where we see that redundant capacity in terms of numbers of vehicles and operators, having a pool of equipment that is managed by the municipality, and then on a user basis, we would, as a using entity, we would effectively rent that equipment from the municipality. So then, stay here is you have a single entity that's maintaining equipment, you have a single fleet as opposed to two fleets. So we'll probably see a reduced number of overall equipment doing these types of requirements.
So it's difficult on snow plowing itself, but on the overall large fleet, it's
We
possible?
think so. We think so.
Okay. Thank you.
And probably making adjustments in fleet that we have one needs. The district maintains plows. We have graders that we use in our parking lots. Pocket loaders are more effective. So we would probably look to invest as a district in pocket loaders and push graders over to municipalities as an example. So there are some areas where we can certainly find efficiency.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. Thank you, Mr. Croft. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Ms. Roth. Ms. Bussey-Giesler?
Yes, did I miss it, or did we talk about the,
He's
happening?
coming.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
quiet?
Welcome.
I'm Mark Spafford. I'm the general manager of the Department of Solid Waste Services for the municipality. And Tom talked about deferred maintenance with buildings and stuff like that that's associated with the school district, and that's kind of been the bane of my existence since I started the job in April of last year, was having to deal with building maintenance issues. And I always kind of feel like one of my favorite movies is The Christmas Story, with, the old man, the dad in The Christmas Story who's like constantly fighting the furnace. And that's kind of what we've been doing since I started there, is fighting, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, issues ever since I got there. So I started there, April, May. It was a nice summer last year. Well, luckily, right as June hit us, our air conditioning unit decided to go out. So I spent the whole part of the summer in my second floor office basically sweating, thinking about whether or not I should change the dress code from, something like jeans and steel toe to something more like shorts and flip-flops. And then also, tending to open the windows at the transfer station. You can imagine it's the smell of money that's walking in from the garbage that's coming off the tipping floor. However, it's not the most pleasant to be exposed to all day, as well as trying to hold meetings, with other individuals. But basically, what I learned about our facility maintenance at SWS, and right, wrong, or indifferent, previous administrations or previous me's there, building maintenance wasn't really the top thing in a priority, because obviously we're a garbage and recycling company. We pick up trash, we drive the trash out to the landfill, we compact and bury it, and do other stuff with gas. But the focus wasn't always building maintenance. So what happened is that, as our buildings are starting to approach 30 years old, as issues are popping up over the years, basically it was just Band-Aid after Band-Aid that's been put on all these systems. Now, I had the pleasure of meeting Darren when I was the Operations and Maintenance Division Director at Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, and we had kind of talked about shared services, and if there was any way that we could leverage some of his facility maintenance personnel to do some of the stuff that we had at the water and wastewater utility. Wasn't really a good fit, but through one of the bleak moments that I had this summer of just sweating to death in my office and trying to figure out how do we properly deal with this, I was reminded of the fact that Darren had this kind of offer on the table. So rekindled my relationship with Darren. We started talking about it. It just happened to coincide with this whole shared services discussions that are going on right now between the muni and the district. And basically, we've been working since August or towards the end of summer last year on figuring out a way to get his building maintenance into our buildings and start trying to help us out. Now, last week, we just signed the memorandum of agreement, and we actually started issuing work orders to some of Darren and Chris, who works for Darren, some of his people to come out and start helping us with, looking at our roof leaks, is there stuff they can do with our generators, helping us out hopefully with our HVAC system and some of those issues. But we're just now starting kind of that process. We're gonna see how it works, and my intent, my hope is that it becomes very fruitful and that we can start to take care of some of these deferred maintenance tasks that are going on. So alternatively, it was hot during the summer. I walk into the office on Monday, it's freezing cold. So it's like a no-win situation until we can start getting some of that additional help from ASD that I'm hoping for. So think of that, next slide. So ASD has a really easy to use asset management system, which Darren will talk about a little bit more, but basically it's a real easy way for our disposal and our collections foremen who are, again, more worried about solid waste and recycling, to get them a real easy way to start logging issues that are associated with the facilities, putting it into the work order system that gets sent to ASD's people to get them out to start helping us to address what some of those issues are and start taking a look at it. My hope is that eventually we'll be able to develop some actual metrics and costs that are associated with our building maintenance, just again, because it's something that we haven't cared about. Hasn't been our, not that we haven't cared about it, but hasn't been our top priority. Currently we use multiple contractors and multiple vendors to perform all the different building maintenance facility needs that we have. My hope is that we develop relationships with ASD. We get a couple, 3 of their crack maintenance professionals in there, get them in, they like us, they like to hang out at the landfill, they start to learn our buildings, and we just develop that rapport that way. And hopefully this can act as a pilot program as well for, to show low-hanging fruit. It's something where it's really a good fit. Again, we're a garbage company, we're not focused on facility maintenance. This is exactly what Darren and Chris and his staff do, so we're really looking forward to it. And then we can get our guys, again, to worry about how to better drive trash out to the landfill compacted, and how better to pick it up and be most efficient doing that, if we don't have to worry about, the building crumbling around us or sweating or freezing to death every morning. So, next slide. I'll let Darren take over.
Well, thank you, Mark. I might take advantage of your landfill meeting room out there. It could make for some pretty short meetings, I think. But anyway, just to give you a little bit of information about the size and scope of the Anchorage School District and how we're able to integrate solid waste services. We are a 24/7 operation. We have about 130 craftsmen. I like to say that we can almost get to the point where we could build the building, given all the trades and the skills that we have in our operation. We have done about 20,000 work orders already year to date. So you can kind of get an idea for the size and scale of the type of work that we're up against right now. All of the work that we do, we can we can meet the requirements of solid waste services in quite a robust way, be it electricians, our carpenter shop, our painters. I've seen some work orders for roofs. And I think one of the neat things about us is that because we can respond, we can prevent infrastructure from degrading to even higher levels. I think that's been one of the problems that solid waste services has had, is if you let a problem continue to grow, it just gets worse and worse. And I guess I'll segue right into saying that that's kind of the issues that we're having at ASD if we don't meet some of these big structural problems that we talked about in our bond issue.
Yeah, basically, I forgot to mention, our asset management program was a guy that had a piece of paper in his pocket that would check off stuff. So as you can imagine, that as staff turnover, that changes, basically all that information walks right out the door when that person leaves.
So if he takes his laundry in and gets it done, yeah, one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to computerize the system for solid waste services. We're going to have a programmed approach to their preventive maintenance. So we're going to go in and change the filters on a regular basis. We're going to go in and lube the motors. We're going to check the belts. So in essence, what they're doing is making an investment in their facility so that they'll last a while. The solid waste services is really going to add about 3% to the overall square footage maintained by ASD. So, while it's a lot of fun, and it's a big project in the sense that getting it all set up, and I'd like to introduce Chris Forrest, who's the project lead on this for us. At the end of the day, we can absorb this very easily. ASD is a political subdivision municipality, and they're used to, come to find out, the municipality is used to doing business with each other within the units. ASD's always kind of been off to the side. We're now engaging in that process. And we'll be able to bill for our costs to solid waste services and get the job done. Go to the next slide. We've talked a little bit about metrics. This is actually one of the metrics that we look at. The level that we're able to drill down into our work order system and the preventative maintenance things that we need. You can see, for example, East High School, we've almost done, well, we've done by now over 600 work orders in that school alone. You can start to see, this is just one of the metrics that we look at. We also look at the crafts, what type of work they're doing where, what workers are working where, that kind of thing. But we'll be able to take this metrics and also apply it to solid waste services and give them kind of an idea for where they're spending their money in terms of maintenance and maybe where they need to spend it in the future. Next slide. One of the things I would like to say on Mark's behalf is that he came into this process with certainly the right attitude. And attitude when you're working on something like this is crucial because you can almost engineer failure in something like this if you don't approach it from the standpoint that we're going to make this work. And Mark has been a great partner, and I think that we do have a very good workable program here. We look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions?
Sounds great.
Ms. Augusta-Gissler?
I just want to thank you very much because I think you have the attitude and the abilities to make this work and all power to you as we move forward and do more of these things. But congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Augusta-Gissler. And I just want to say, and I've said this before, I've been around a long time, and this is my last meeting, and I'm really excited to finally see something happening after all these years in terms of shared services. So thank you very much. And thank you, Ms. Rouse, also. Mr. Training?
All these years, everybody runs for office saying we want to share services. It's nice to actually see this happening. So thank you very much. Now we can tell our constituents it is happening on this level. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Training. There are no other questions. Thank you. Our next agenda item is adjusted school times, and I don't know who asked for that. Oh, I know what happened. At the last meeting, the minutes showed that we were going to talk about adjusted school times again, and I don't know who wants to lead the conversation. Thank you, Dr. Bishop.
Yeah, through our president, that was a question raised back in December for the school district. And the board and our president can discuss the different items and tasks and goals. Start time study is on there. It was at a board meeting placed for discussion at our June retreat, knowing that was going to be a major lift. When 49 or so thousand kids come to us, 6,000 adults every day, and that's not including the parents that drop them off and schedule their lives around school start times. It's more than a simple discussion. It is a major stakeholder investment. And so the board, knowing the Destination 2020 goals and achievement in students, was going to consider that at the June retreat. And certainly we can add more, but there hasn't been additional work until that retreat to say, yes, invest your time and energy in solving this.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Any other comments on this subject? Okay, we are now at member comments. Ms. Augusta-Gissler?
Yes, I want to shift hats for a minute. I also serve as co-chair of the 90% by 2020 group, and there is a campaign going on right now to promote how math is used. I think it's a common class for students not to perform well in. And the campaign is called #IUseMath. And it's a simple thing with your cell phone, recording a little video to talk about how you, in your day-to-day life, either career or personal, use math. If you've never recorded a video using the selfie application, I have some instructions here. But otherwise, you simply, if you have a Twitter feed, you record it and post it on #IUseMath, or I have the address here of the person at United Way who's facilitating putting this up on the website of the 90% by 2020. So some papers here, and I apologize, I spilled some water on them, but they're still legible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gosey. Mr. Trainee.
We had a request from the Assembly member that's not here, that if the school district could give us academic achievements made by students who would like to recognize them at Assembly meetings. I mean, we always do this football and hockey and all these other things, but we're also concerned about the academic achievement level. So when you've got people that do outstanding job academically, if you'd get the clerk what they did and who they are, well then set them up to be recognized at Assembly meetings, if you would, please.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Gosey.
Yes, in fact, we have an ongoing part at the end of our work session before we go into executive session where we honor students and staff. And I believe some of those same students, we could forward names to you. In fact, we've gotten so good at identifying. Now the challenge is how do we schedule all these kids in? So we'd be happy to deal with that fortunate dilemma by sending some of those students to be
Well,
recognized.
far too often we
at the
recognize their physical achievements, we appreciate that, but we also want to deal with their intellectual abilities and their
Right.
achievements. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was looking for you.
It's like, when's that coming up on the agenda?
Anyway, any other member comments?
Just, if no one else.
Mr. Mayor.
If there's anyone else in the queue.
No.
Okay. Well, I just did want to acknowledge that, Madam Chair, this is your last occasion at one of these events, and I thought that we ought to recognize it and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I would stand.
Okay, we had an audience participation. Would anybody in the audience like to make a comment or ask some questions? Ms. Mitchell?
I'm Nina Mitchell, from Milwaukee, and thank you all for your wonderful service. I've heard from students and families of West and East that have access to the public buses in Anchorage, that more students are staying after school, more kids are coming back in the evenings for activities. And I'm wondering if that's something that we might look at doing more of, where you guys are feeling that might go, and that could possibly even tie into the whole start time issue down the road.
Please, Dr.
Madam Chair, we actually have, I believe, 6 or 7 schools that are provided access and bus passes by the city, and that they are well used as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Anyone else?
But-
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, and on that, I think that we're contemplating some changes to the bus routes, which ought to make being on the municipalities' buses a little bit more accessible for a lot of students.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Croft?
And, I mean, those were the easiest ones, though. Those were where you get the most bang for the buck. East is just, obvious in terms of its bus access. South and,
What we do get is I get
Blue Ridge, you get very, much more difficult. The others sort of in between. So, it's a great idea and we ought to do it. I'm not sure we're gonna get the same punch from the others, but there'll be advantages.
Well, it just seems like at the age of shared services, that's something that possibly could really leverage.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Ms. Galvin, I believe?
Hi, I'm Elise Galvin, and I just wanted to tag on to Gina's thoughts, to think about a plan for that, beyond just adding in these extra shared services, but maybe we could find ways to save the ASD buses by way of, eventually morphing into high school students using those buses solely with the exception of spec ed students and other exceptions that you have to have. It's just some ideas that folks might come together and come up with a plan, thinking if we needed to do this, what would that look like? And how would the city have to change up their routes, et cetera? And I would offer the same thing with the start times. I know that was discussed. From our perspective as just regular old citizens, we're working on finding out whether or not there's a will of the students and parents and that, that might be worthy of at least a little thinking about a plan from your perspective, as you're, working as a city and as a district. Because if we're not very intentional around it, it might just be slapped on as another thought out there. And I think that there might be the will, but I'm not sure, we're gonna find out, to really, get that moving so that it can be one more lever in helping every student succeed.
Thank you, Ms. Galvin. Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, my dream would be if you had students driving buses and setting them up with plows, that we'd both be perfect. But I don't think they're going to let us do that. But part of what has to happen is the state gets its way through its fiscal situation is it has to give Anchorage and the Anchorage School District more flexibility in how we deploy the resources that we have, and they need to let go of the reins. Frankly, they don't do a good job using it, and local government is in a much better position to figure out what to do best.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Galvin. Mr. Donnelly?
Yeah, I think it's essential that Anchorage advocate for an update to the school cost differential factor in the foundation formula. As near as I can figure, it hasn't been updated since 2005. There have been attempts to start towards that direction. But if the numbers are anything like I'm hearing, it's a very significant amount. It could be over tens of millions of dollars that Anchorage is getting unfairly shortchanged because the school cost differential hasn't been updated. So that's a key thing that we ought to be asking the legislature to do. Another thing is on the discussion of the closing the schools, combining schools. When we drafted that formula in '98, we never anticipated these kind of situations. Alaska was just growing, right? But we did put in a savings clause for school districts that suffered major downturns in population so that they would be held harmless for a few years. And I think something like that would be very appropriate in the foundation formula also for school districts that take the initiative to save money by condensing schools. Right now, as the superintendent pointed out, the formula punishes that, and it shouldn't if it's intended as a flexible measure to save money for the school. So some sort of additional savings clause in the foundation formula would be a really good thing to push for when it came to the actual school size and its impact on funding.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Anyone else? Thank you. So we're now at the agenda item to schedule our next meeting, which is going to be in June 9th.
June 9th, and we'll be hosting it at the Anchorage School District.
Okay, excellent. The next meeting is June 9th.
10 a.m. to 12 p.m.
Thank you, Ms. Agosti. Any other comments before we adjourn? Thank you, everybody, for being here. Meeting's adjourned.